Sure. Biggest thing is just keep trusting God. Whether you
Mhm.
see He's working, you don't see, that song Waymaker, even in the background, He's working, you don't see it. He's working on
Mhm.
His own time and in His own way. And you just got to trust Him, whether you see it or not. Just give it some time, and maybe it's a lot of time, whatever, but God's good and He
Yeah.
loves you and He knows what you're going through. And just know that He's there for you.
Welcome to Remember God, a podcast where we practice remembering God in the midst of trials. Hi, I'm Brenda, and I help followers of Jesus recall God's miracles to successfully navigate current challenges. Welcome to Remember God, a podcast to practice remembering God in the midst of trials. If you're a follower of Jesus who's in a difficult season and finds yourself wanting to take control of the situation instead of trusting God, this is the place for you. This is where we will help you remember the places where God has shown up in the past, giving you the tools and strength to navigate through today's challenges. I'm Brenda Savanhu, author of Memorial Stones, writer, coach, and your companion on the journey of remembering what God has done. And today I'm very excited to welcome our guest on the show, Jan Johnson. Jan is a new friend. She is also an author and a podcaster who has loved telling stories since childhood. She started her writing career at age 8 when she wrote the Mud Pie Cookbook. Which are you going to share some of those recipes, Jan, so that we can make those recipes? And
I
then
do
later, her first book was The Little Red Man Bound by her dad. Today, she continues that creative calling as a faith based fiction author, as well as devotionals. And she is the host of two podcasts, Women of the Northwest, Ordinary Women Leading Extraordinary Lives, and Just Talking About Jesus, where I was honored to be a guest in December. And Jan shares about real people, real faith, honest conversations about joy, sorrows, and life with Jesus in general. Welcome to the podcast, Jan. I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Gee, I sound wonderful, don't I?
You are wonderful. What do you mean? Like that doesn't even do justice to who you are and all the things you've done. Gosh. Well, Jen, that my podcast is about remembering God, and it's based on my book, Memorial Stones, which you've read, and I really appreciate that. And we found that we have something in common, your devotional, Discovering Your Journey, and then my book, Memorial Stones, have common threads of like finding God in all of these different places. So I ordinarily don't do this, but I actually want to start with discovering your journey simply because of the similarities we have there. Like, what were the memorial stones that led you to writing this devotional?
Yeah, so most things that I do are because they're God drops.
Right? Me
Just like
too.
I'm not looking for anything, but God says, "Oh, how about writing a Bible study this time?" And that's what I wanted to be about. And so, particularly the idea is that everybody's got a journey that they're on, no matter where in life you are. You've got some kind of journey with a whole bunch of pit stops along the way, good and bad. But to compare them to the characters of Ruth, Jonah, Joseph, and David. So
Hmm.
I chose those stories, of course, after prayer, but I chose those stories because they're succinct stories. You know,
Mm,
they're a composite story that is easy to be able to see the things that each of those characters went through. And when you break it down, the things that those characters went through are the same things that we all go through still
right.
today, you know? So if you take with Ruth, um, you've got grief in there because I mean, heavy grief, husbands and kids and sons-in-laws and whatever. And then a move, which is also can be a grieving process of, where am I going?
Mm,
Unsurety. Where is God taking me? And with Ruth, she had to change her faith base.
right.
She was from Moab, so she wasn't a Christian. I mean, she wasn't one of the Jews that were there. And so to have the trust in somebody with like Naomi to follow her to somewhere else, you know? I mean, part of it, I guess, if you're starving, you want to go where there's food. There's
Right.
that job, and what's the motivation with that, you know? But and then I compared it to stories, each other things to stories in my own life. So with Ruth, I had been married originally with my husband Howard. He had a brain tumor, and so after he died, I had 3 kids, and I was on my own. Ended up marrying my second husband, Ed, but he lived on a farm, which I had never done before, and his lifestyle was completely different than anything I had done before, which is,
Mhm.
like, off the grid. So there were a lot of changes there, you know, all the spring water was had to be boiled, so if you were gonna drink anything, you had to do that. It was just a wood stove to keep things warm. A lot of details that were, in fact, when I married him, there was still an outhouse. So, and we combined families, so there was a huge, huge change of things. So I felt like I I'd given my teaching career to come up here. I didn't know anybody that was up here. I was isolated because it was, 20 minutes to drive to any place. But the bigger thing was that he was Catholic and I was not. And
Mm.
so to make that huge leap from one to the other because he was insistent that we weren't gonna do both things. We were gonna do his way.
Right.
And so to change from my kids too, that I'd raised in, a Protestant background,
Mhm.
to there's all the things, that go with that. That was a huge, huge, huge change. A lot of things are just like Ruth. So that was one of them.
Yeah.
So you can see, when you're looking at a biblical character, where was God in those things, that they were going through? Where was he? And how did he provide? Of course, he made everything work together for good,
Right. Yeah.
he being in the line of Jesus. But to take those same things and then look at your own life, so where did those things happen?
Mhm.
With, Jonah, Jonah gets mad at God. And, because he doesn't wanna do what God tells him to do. And he's like, "What right do you have to be mad at me?" And Jonah's, stomps off, and well, my getting mad at God was when, um, my youngest daughter we ended up with 10 kids altogether, so my youngest daughter, who was the closest to us, and we call every single day and just so they had the closest relationship with, and so she decided to become a nun. And that threw me for a loop. It actually threw both of us for a loop, because
Mm.
it's kinda like going in the service. You go where they tell you, you don't have any contact for the first year, and it's like and it was in Washington, DC instead of Oregon, and it was like yeah, it was really rough, and I was mad at God. I mean, I was serious, like, "What the heck going on here?" And, out of my 10 kids, I only have a few that are believers, and she was
Mm.
one of 'em, so to be able to share that faith with your daughter, and have that close kind of a faith relationship and then have it cut off was like, that's not the way things are supposed to go.
Right.
When I taken a walk and I'm getting mad at God, he says, "Well, what right do you have to be mad?" And I said, "Well, come on, man. I mean," and he said, "Didn't you pray for your kids to know me? And doesn't she know me?" And it's like, "Yeah, but, I mean, couldn't she know you and still be in Portland or still have contact or something, or even get married and have kids, right?" And he says, "Yeah." And then half the time I'm ranting at him and there's just silence. He's not even responding. It's like, I'm trying to have a conversation here.
Mm.
And as God does, he just listens
You're
and
right, right.
waits for your rant to be done. And then he finally says, "I have things I need to do with her." It's like,
Mm.
fine. How do you argue with that? And now it's been 3 years, and she is the most joyful I've ever seen her and exactly where God's wanted her to be. It's just
Wow.
so yeah, it's just really, truly where she is supposed to be, you know?
Right. Wow.
And I don't know, I'll probably get mad at God again for something else, I don't know, but,
Right.
that was
As
that was
we do, as we
that
do.
was a defining moment, definitely a defining moment. I can laugh about it now, but it was not. There were a lot of tears, it
I'm
just,
sure.
yeah, that was really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
So I want to go back because I want to ask some specific questions around both of these that you've shared. So starting with your comparison to Ruth, I was thinking, so Ruth, she lost her husband, you lost your husband, and then, she got remarried. You got remarried, but there was her life completely changed, your life completely changed. And so you mentioned specifically, I want to go back to switching to Catholicism. How did you wrestle with that? And how did God show up for you there when you were going from Protestant to Catholic? What was that journey there?
yeah, yeah. With hindsight, I believe that God placed us in the church that we were in, which it was a small Catholic church, and because in my prior life, I had led women's ministries, and I had done music and worship and just a lot of things that I had under my belt
Mhm.
that were not evident in that Catholic church. And in many of them, whatever, it's more the basis of going to mass is for communion. And that was a difficult thing for me because for them, they believe that that Jesus is physically present in the host.
Mhm.
And so for me to switch over and become Catholic, which is a year-long process,
Mm.
that means all that time I can't take communion, but it's not based on and and so wrestling with I know so much more about the Bible than most of these people do. I know so much, my faith is so much stronger than a lot of these people are and whatever, just trying to wrap my mind around how, and a lot of things because a lot of those things are wrapped into tradition, you know,
Mhm.
tradition rather than just in the Bible as generally what we believe, right?
Right.
Um, on the good side of it, I learned because a lot of it is environmentally, like the Old Testament
Mhm.
and the temples and how everything is set up and the seasons and having different festivals and all of that kind of stuff. So I learned a lot on that aspect. But because I was in this church and it was small, I started a women's fellowship, which met once a month. And so I taught them praise and worship song and I did Bible studies with them. And I did that for 20 years, whatever. And then we started having 2 retreats a year, um, and so I felt like God really placed me there for them as much as for me, to be able to balance out the 2 things.
Yeah. It sounds like a lesson in humility as well.
And I probably needed a lesson in humility. Yeah, yeah. And, interestingly, when I married Ed, I mean, there was enough similarities. I mean, it's like you believed Jesus died, rose again, I mean, there's
Mhm.
enough basic things that I can compare to that you can accept to do. But the knowledge of who God was missing, with my husband. He'd never read a Bible before. He'd never done anything. And so my prayer at that time, 36 years ago, was that God would really take him on a journey of who he is and to be and now he's leading Bible studies.
Wow.
I mean, he's always been really involved, but now he's really digging in, and partly I think because of my nun daughter has gotten online, like lots of YouTube teachings and whatever too that are whatever. So he's really, really deep into his faith.
Yeah. That's amazing. So how did you Like, how did you agree to say yes with those differences at the beginning?
I think it's you know what you don't know. If I'd had a clue, I wouldn't have said yes.
Mm,
Because it's a lot. It's a lot,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
We're finally at a point now that, the kids are grown and whatever to where I go to mass with him and then I go to my church afterwards.
Okay. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I say this a lot, just in my own journey is if God had given me the syllabus, I probably would have said no.
Mhm.
But, because, he was like, "Come on, let's go." I was like, "Yeah," but I didn't know what I was walking into. And then as I've been walking the journey, I'm like, "Oh man, this sucks. This is really hard." And then I remember the words of Peter, "Where else would I go, Lord? You have the words of life." So even as difficult as it is, um, I'm still choosing to continue to walk with you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's been combining families. Holy moly.
Yeah. So how many children did you have separately before you got married?
I had 3 with Howard. It had 2 natural and 2 adopted. Of
Mm,
course, then you have all of that, and because of divorce, and they're going back and forth to Seattle to their moms and back and forth, so there's a lot of pecking order going on, and then we had 3 more together.
wow.
Yeah.
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 And then
It
all
was
this you're doing with an outhouse.
good because at that time, we had 2 bathrooms, 1 out and 1 in. Now we just have 1. No,
Gosh.
there's a whole bunch of stories of that too.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing.
Huh?
So then now moving on to the story about Jonah and his anger and then your anger. I heard in one of your podcast episodes where your daughter, Sister Mercy, is
Yeah.
on, and you were just sharing about that anger that you had when you found out, or she shared that she was going to go and be a nun and she wasn't going to have a phone and you weren't going to be able to be in touch with her and just all of that. So share how you wrestled through that anger with the Lord.
Yeah, because part of it is, I mean, honestly, projecting my anger just toward the system of it, you know,
Mhm.
the Catholic system of the isolating and to doing all that, and it was hard because when she told me, she says, "Well, we'll still be able to communicate, and it'll just look a little bit different and things." I'm going, "Yeah, they told you a line." I think because we couldn't call. If we tried to call, they wouldn't put us through to anything, and then we'd write letters and we'd never hear back from her. And so she'd say, well, finally, when we'd hear, she'd say, "Well, I wrote the letters, whatever." Well, so they were just supposed to put their letters on the counter and the mother was supposed to mail them, but she wouldn't mail them. 'Em. They'd just be sitting
Wow.
there for months. And so there wasn't any of that communication and ho like, "How are you doing?" That's my baby girl. "How are you holding up? Is this, like, working okay for you?" I mean, you can't there's no answers to anything, and there isn't any way to get through, so I felt really resentful, you know,
Mm,
that it was like that, and she was, of course it was hard for her to tell me. She told her dad way months and months before she told me.
mm,
And then when she finally did, it was like she got down on her knees, kinda like, "This is what I'm gonna do, and this is what I'm gonna" like,
yeah.
yeah. But then
Wow.
since we've been there a couple of times, visited a couple of times, and it's when you walk in to the convent and you start out in the first one for the first year with just a separate one, a juniorette, and then you go into another one, but it's like this whole feeling of joy from all the girls that are there. It's really something. And then
Mhm,
part of it, I mean, I guess as far as reconciling and, over the big picture, but part of it is you don't have a job you're going to every day.
mhm,
You don't have a man in your life, which could be good and it could be not so good all the time,
mhm.
you
Right.
know? You don't have a lot of responsibilities. I mean, you got your chores and those kind of things, and you're spending half your day, doing theology and learning things, and the other half in praying and community and stuff. And so it's like, I don't know, why wouldn't you be happy?
Right.
You don't worry about where your food's coming from or where everything is. Whatever's donated is what you got, and, you know? So a
Yeah.
lot of the cares of the world are pretty slick.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So I was thinking of you. So she gives you the news that she's going to become a nun. You wrestle with that. You release her and let her go. But then she's gone, and all the things you feared came true. You weren't able to talk to her even though she thought you would be able to. You weren't receiving the letters. My question is, you got to that place of release, but then now it seems like things are worse than how you expected them to be. How did you wrestle with that with God?
I think I just had to sit back and rest and keep
Mhm.
going back to God saying, "I've got things I need to do with her,"
Mm, mhm.
and really giving it over to Him because I truly believe that's what He told me,
Mhm.
really that's and He did.
Yeah.
And He couldn't do those things with me in the way
Right.
or even her dad
Right.
like that. So I think even if she had, been accepted into an order in Portland, which was closer, but if we'd have been in her life there too, I think we'd have been in the way of what
Mhm.
he needed to do with her. So I think part of that is that release and just going, "Okay, God, you're bigger than this. You're bigger than me. You know how I feel, but you know I'm gonna get over it." You know,
Mhm.
really just
Yeah.
kind of hands open to him and just saying, "Alright, I'm gonna let you do this."
Yeah. Yeah. So your memorial stone that you kept going back to was God saying, I've got things that I
Mhm.
need to do with your daughter. And what right do you have to be
And
mad?
that and I guess really think about it, maybe I should be thinking of what other kids that I'm holding on to thinking they need to have their lives a certain way
Mm,
or not do, because maybe I'm standing in the way of what God's doing with them, I don't know.
wow.
That's a
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah. Like where else might I be in the way?
Mm,
Yeah. One of the lines I highlighted in your book on page 11, it says paths can be chosen, created by circumstances, motivated by our beliefs or the influences of others. And so, it sounds like for your daughter, her path was motivated by her belief of what she wanted to do and what she felt the Lord was choosing for her. But for you, that wasn't necessarily your choice. It was your circumstance.
right. That's true. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I guess maybe, truly to think about it is like how much of that do we it's when you're in relationship with somebody else and trying to figure it out, it's like
Mhm.
how much of it is it supposed to be our way because it's us
Yeah. Yeah.
instead of really stepping back to see what God's going to do with them,
Mhm.
and instead of just being tight fisted and, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I was invited to speak on a call this morning, a prayer call this morning, and one of the things I shared was that recently I've had to learn how to release my expectations because I was expecting God to show up in a specific way based on the promises he had given me. And then when he wasn't showing up that way, I was extremely disappointed and even to the point of anger.
You were mad at God?
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. But and I think though it's a good thing to be mad at God because I used to be the person who would suppress my emotions, and it was actually God who challenged me to release them no matter how angry I was at him, to just release that because not releasing that was creating a pressure cooker. And I was very works based, very performance based. Like, well, if I do these things, if I don't get mad at God, if I do these things, then he's going to show up in the way that I want him to show up. And that's not true. And so, even in just having the freedom to express my anger, has been really good for me. And of course, right, like not in like a disrespectful way and not in a blaspheming way, but just like I'm really angry about this. I expected this to show up this way. This is what I wanted, but this is what you're doing, and I don't like it.
And God has broad shoulders,
Yeah, absolutely.
you know? It's okay to get mad at God.
Mhm.
It's okay to do that because, I mean, we're just kids. We're
Right.
just like little kids, like arms crossed and stomping our feet and saying, "No, this is how it was supposed to be."
Mhm.
Even look at, as you're saying that, even look at when Jesus came, he didn't show up like they thought he was gonna be. He was
Exactly.
not the Messiah they thought he was gonna be, and they
Yeah.
got angry,
Yeah.
because he didn't do it the way they thought he should.
Yeah. Yeah, they thought he was gonna ride in on this powerful stallion in his armor and his sword and just, like, take everybody down, and here he comes on a donkey
What?
from Nazareth,
Yeah.
this carpenter. Like, what are you doing?
Who are you anyway? You're not really. That's not the way it's supposed to be.
Right? My gosh. Yeah, so no, I can appreciate your being angry, and I appreciate that you were frank in your conversations with God. I think if I remember correctly in the podcast I heard, I think you were taking a walk or something, and then the Lord was like,
Yeah.
"What right do you have to be mad?"
Kinda stopped me in my tracks as I'm, like, working it out.
Oh my gosh, and we think we've got it, we think we know what's best, and he's like, "Yeah, baby girl or
Yeah.
baby boy, it's not. That's not the case."
But isn't it great that we have some hindsight, that you can
Yeah.
look a few years later and just see where God has taken things and what he's done
Mhm.
with it?
Yeah,
I mean, and how
absolutely.
I mean, the beauty in the story of Joseph, heck, look at how many things that looked like they were bad and awful and whatever, and God was turning him into a leader to save the world,
Yeah.
from
I'm
famine.
glad you brought up Joseph because that's what I was gonna ask you next was about Joseph and your life comparison to
Yeah,
him because he's mentioned in your book as well.
uh, uh, so many things with Joseph, goodness, First of all, with dysfunctional family,
Mhm.
which I had for sure, and he had for sure, and they're, throwing him in a pit and doing, you know, I mean, what's the whole hierarchy there, and who's gonna allow this to happen, and I mean, there were, like, 5 different parents in the situation, the moms and
Mhm.
so you can imagine the battle of the families and the who's who in the zoo and right?
Uh-huh.
But all the way along, everything that God did with him, he throws him in the pit, well, it was a dry pit. He coulda drowned in there, That could have been the end of the
True.
story.
Right.
Okay, that was a short story. But no, the Midianites buy him and take him to Potiphar and everything's great. And he had leadership skills all the way through, or
Mhm.
he wouldn't have been put in leadership roles. And
Right.
even in jail, he was in a leadership role,
Yeah.
So everything God used there, even the dreams, that he started out with that, made him mad to begin with,
Mhm.
and at the end, it's like, oh, kinda humbled him. Like,
Right.
"Ooh, that really wasn't so great," but the wrongly accused too.
Mhm.
My story in the wrongly accused was one with my granddaughter during COVID. It was just at the start of COVID, and she was 9, and her dad kidnapped her, accused my daughter of sexually abusing her,
No.
and he's super narcissistic, and his wife is just wacko. I mean, there aren't even words for how she's really off the rails. So,
Mm.
because it was COVID, then she wasn't going to school. They isolated her from her friends. They wouldn't let her have any contact with any of my family or any of his either. Um, and then they brainwashed her into believing that she'd been sexually abused since she was 3.
Wow.
And so, first of all, even just how you wrap your mind around. how does that even happen? Brainwashing.
Mhm.
How does that even a thing or whatever? But just all of a sudden cut off, no contact, and there's no. So my daughter doesn't have any contact. She didn't have any contact. She lost her job. She lost just. She was working at jail, doing the intake, which was just ugly and giving her nightmares. And then she had to start reading all the in-depth reports of the criminal reports, and so she was having night terrors and things. But anyway, she lost her job at the jail, and of course, there's no lawyers, you can't get hold of anybody to during COVID, the whole thing was just and then it's every day, "Well, this isn't gonna last that long. This is, it's just a mistake, there's some kinda misunderstanding, whatever," but and she's 6 hours away from me, so it's not like I could be down there every day.
Right.
Anyway, it that indeed, out of everything I've ever done, had gone through that whole wrongly accused of her being wrongly accused and whatever after a 6-hour psychosexual eval, there wasn't any indication that she'd ever abused her daughter, there was nothing physical, granddaughter that she'd abused, and yet they were able to do that, and it's like, "How can this happen? Where are the people who are supposed to be really protecting things?" You know?
Right.
And
Right.
because it was the message of abuse, then when she's going to the counselors, then they're going, "Oh, we need to jump on this." So 3 counselors are jumping on and then treating her like she's been abused
So they're reinforcing this
and
lie.
reinforce the whole lie of it. So then finally 5 years later, the court vindicated my daughter, and she could have seen her, but by this time now, my granddaughter doesn't wanna have anything to do with her because she
My
believes the lie.
gosh.
And there's like a Stockholm syndrome, where you identify with your captor,
Right.
and so the stepmom has this hold on her that's just like, I don't know, it's just so there, it's like, "Okay, God, somehow in this big picture, I don't
Yeah.
know, I don't know," and they're Mormon, and there's all of that too, and it's just like, "Okay, God, I gotta believe somehow. Are you right in her testimony? Are you doing what's happening here?"
Mm.
So that was my story to relate to Joseph being when Potiphar's wife tried to.
You wrongly accused him. So your
Uh-huh.
daughter, is she a believer, or like how did she get through this?
That's I would I have one of my really close friends kinda has been a second mom to her down there for over the years and
Mhm.
grew up with her anyway, who's very faith faith-filled. Would just be clinging on to scriptures and saying to her whatever, but then she ended up with a partner who grew up in a Christian home, and now he's like the other side. So it's like so she's kinda poo-pooed all of that and what I don't know. I don't know how she's doing. She's still not a happy person,
Mm.
as far as that goes, and, I mean, there's always that hole in your heart. It's like, "Where is this person? And if I ever see her again, is she even gonna
Yeah, that's
want
a
to,"
yeah.
because yeah, it's this vision of this little girl that comes running, "Grandma," or "Mom," or, but not. And so then
Yeah.
it's like, "Okay, God, why didn't you want my daughter to raise her daughter?" You know? Why
Oof.
why did you set that up? The
Yeah, any answers on that?
Nope. No. So that was in, well, what, 2019. Yeah. So she just
Yeah.
turned 16
Okay. And yeah, so you haven't seen her or heard from her in years. Yeah.
and of everything I've ever gone through, that's the hardest.
Yeah. That's a
Yeah,
difficult thing. I'm so sorry to hear that for you, for your daughter,
yeah,
and for your granddaughter. These relationships that this time that she's missing in these relationships.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll be praying for healing and reconciliation for everyone involved. Yeah.
I just don't feel I feel like I feel like here's just God's writing their testimony. At some point,
Mhm.
gonna come to the other side of it and realize, like, "Wait a minute. Whoa, wait, this doesn't make sense," you know?
Yeah.
She ended up, her other grandma, I don't know if she's ever gone to church, maybe a little bit, I don't know, something, but God's not in her life as far as that goes. Um but she's told her, "I don't I don't ever remember my mom doing these things, whatever, but Leah says it's true, so it must have happened." So there's
Mm,
not so I think there's at some point in her life, I just think she's gonna put 2 and 2 together and figure out that something wacko really happened, and that hopefully
mhm.
with our prayers, God grabs hold of her and says, "Yep, okay, this is why, because I wanted to change your life into somebody that could be sharing your testimony."
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Yeah, and like Joseph, right? I mean, was it 17 years?
Yeah.
It's a long time. Like, I would be interested in asking him when I get to heaven, how did you survive those 17 years? And then also in a land where um they weren't believers. They didn't have the same belief as him.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I'm grateful that you shared that because it's very real and we even as believers, right? We have present day difficulties, right? We have present day things that we're like, "Lord, why is this happening? Why are you allowing this to happen? Why haven't you brought reconciliation? Why haven't you revealed the truth?" All of the things, all the questions that we have. So, thank you for sharing that.
The bottom line, you just have to trust God. You just have to
Mhm.
trust God because you believe that He knows. You believe that He cares. You
Mhm.
believe He's got him in His hands. Y You just have to trust that what He's doing is somehow gonna make sense at some point.
Yeah. What examples do you have of that where you've trusted, um, and it looked like an impossible circumstance like this, but then you've seen, um, him come through?
Well, I think my first husband to begin with, when he had the
Mhm.
brain tumor, I was just like, "Oh, where is this gonna go? How is this actually gonna work out to to being a single parent or whatever?" But I wouldn't, at this point, have traded I wouldn't have traded that time for anything because it was such a rich time with God of
Mm,
waiting and experiencing it and expecting and seeing how he was moving, that even though he wasn't being healed, God was healing his spirit and moving him into such a rich relationship with him that it was, I wouldn't have ever traded that. He left he left his spiritual journal after he died, and I thought, of course, you don't read it when they're alive,
right.
but it was all about what God was doing in his life, and his understanding of, "Oh, now I can't." After he had surgery to try and remove it, they couldn't find it, and it left him paralyzed on his right side. He was, um, he was 35 when this started, 36, and, died when he was 38. So, I mean, for a young guy, to try and figure out your life, you can't work anymore, you can't drive anymore, you can't do, all
Mhm.
these things that you had been able to do, and yet it was like, "Okay, how do you wanna use me, Lord? Because I know you can still use me." Yeah,
Mhm.
and he ended up
Wow.
writing words of encouragement to people and cards and things because he could do that, and,
Right.
you know
Yeah, there was someone it was on one of your podcasts, I forget the gentleman's name, it might have been Marty's husband,
John?
who mentioned that was it did he have cancer?
Yeah, he had throat cancer.
Yeah, and he said he misses that time because he was the closest to Jesus at that time,
Yeah,
and that now he gets distracted with things and with life, but it really struck me that he said he misses that because
yeah,
that's where he was the closest with Jesus.
yeah, and if there's a stone to be had, that's your stone, really.
Mhm.
When you are in the midst of something that you don't see the end or see how it's gonna work together. And here's a very cool story. So I wrote a memoir about
Mm.
him and,
Mhm.
his story, and so I wanted to do um, an audio. with it. My youngest son, who was 3 at the time when his dad died, does voiceover.
Yeah,
So I
okay.
asked him to come up from California and do his dad's voice. Well, he didn't really know his dad, and he'd only been at church maybe a handful of times since he left high school, right? So he comes up and he's reading his journal, and there's places in it that I think truly they like it's almost like John Patmos. It's like in these he called it the fourth dimension of just what God was revealing to him and stuff. And my son had a moment, just like, just stop.
Mm.
And he'd been going to church with me for those 3 weeks while he was here, and he goes, "Oh, I like this tree." And then we started watching The Chosen together, which, of course, that makes it so real, right?
Right.
So, it was a couple of weeks after he went back home, and again, another little God drop, but guy he says, "You realize that Howard was able to evangelize his son 35 years later?"
That's a memorial stone.
Is that it just gave me shivers.
So, to your point of holding on to the joy even in the midst of difficulty, as you were going through that difficult season, and even the children, right? They lost their father. But then who knew that all of these years later,
Yeah.
he would evangelize his own son through
Yeah.
his words that he had written in that journal?
Just it's isn't it like, wow.
Who would have thunk it? Did you even think that all those years ago?
And Howard had named him his middle name Evan for evangelist. And it's like, yeah, okay, right. We'll see about that. But now, so now we have a phone call every day, a Zoom FaceTime, and we read the Bible together every day.
Wow.
And he's questioning things, and how does it work out? And what is this? And what about that? And this is perspective of things is really not being a believer for all these years, of how that, but it's like he's 100% in
Wow.
and taking on his charge of being an evangelist.
Yeah. Wow. That's
So I guess,
amazing.
if you're talking about how do you know that how can you depend on trusting God?
Mhm.
That's why. Who would think 35, 6, so I don't know, 35 years later to have that happen, and like that's a lot of years
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
not expecting or thinking anything like that would happen, but God's got this.
Yeah. And hence the importance of memorial stones, right? Because you have mapping our paths in your book. And so
Mhm.
I'm imagining as you're mapping your path, like that is a significant moment.
No
And
kidding.
that even after you're gone, your great grandchildren and great great grandchildren can see this thread and how the Lord weaved it in your lives, in your family.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yes.
even with that thought, I mean, how many of us have grandmas that prayed for us?
Hmm. Yeah, that we probably have no clue about. So, Jen, on a daily basis, how are you remembering God's faithfulness? Do you use any particular tools, rhythms, habits?
I think the biggest thing is doing my podcast interviews and listening to
Mhm.
people and their stories, because it just keeps reinforcing who God is all the way
Right.
through. There's all these but God moments. This is where I was at. I didn't think I was gonna, but God came through and was faithful.
Mhm.
And when you just keep hearing that and sharing them over and over, and then once you share them and you see the responses of people and how they identify those things, it's just like that just keeps me going. It's
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. So, as we're starting to wrap up, I also want to talk about some of the fun projects you do. So, your fiction writing, tell us about that a little bit.
Oh, I wrote the memoir, and that was brutal, because trying
Yeah.
at first, I didn't know how to write. I mean, it took me a long time to figure out exactly how to do that, and but also because you have to bring up all these things, and then part of it, I have to admit, part of it almost was like almost felt like I was having an affair
Mm.
because I was so into my first husband's story, that I was almost living this dual life thing,
Yeah. I
kinda
hadn't
weird.
even thought about that. Yeah, that is
Yeah, it was
weird.
weird. It was weird. Anyway, and then I wanted to do something fun. My nurse daughter, Sister Mercy, was nun daughter, was a nurse at a large hospital, and she worked on this really crazy patient floor. So on her way home every morning, she'd call, keep herself awake, and tell me these crazy stories. And I said, and she had this cohort of a few friends, whatever, that she was nursing with. And so I said, how about if we write a romance? Let's do a medical romance and we'll include some of these crazy patient stories. And at that time, she was thinking maybe she'd like to be in a romance. So,
Right.
isn't she? Well, you've seen her. So, she's a lot of life, a lot of fun and silly and a lot of life. I ended up writing 3 stories with that which were in a series. So there was the first one, which I kinda based on her as the character, just trying to find somebody, gets mixed up with the wrong kinda guy and enabled him and whatever, gets out of that, and then she ends up with the guy she's supposed to be with, who works as a nonprofit that I kinda based on. We have a lot of kids with, sponsored kids through Unbound, and so I kinda based his story on, that whatever. So they get together. Then her roommate is the next story, and she's has a brother that had Batten disease and died from that, and then her mom dies from cancer, so she's just caught in the middle of all of this grief, and kind of her dad doesn't feel like she has a relationship with him, so she wants to kinda, is wrestling with that, who he
Mhm.
where's her place with him and whatever, and then he's started a foundation for a Batten Foundation, but the researcher, she ends up with the researcher, and he's had kind of a abusive father and drug addicted and whatever. So there's kind of wrestling with forgiveness and trying to find his relationship. So it's kind of a two dad type of thing there. And then the third one I did based on a girl that lives locally here who was an abortion survivor.
Mm.
So when she was an adult, I'd known her since I knew her parents from way back, like 40 years ago, when they decided to adopt. And so, but she is, as an adult, she was looking at her own 2 kids and just going, "Oh, I love my kids so much. I wish I could find my mom and let her just say thank you to her for giving me
Mm.
life." And
Right.
then she asked her parents first about, what they would think about doing that, and they looked at each other and it just went, "Maybe we should talk." So then they ended up telling her that she was an abortion survivor, and so, I had long talks with Amy just about just all of her feelings of what was that like, and then trying to search and then actually finding her mom and trying to do, just the whole story. So this story is based on her story, uh,
Mm.
that yeah. So that's
Yeah.
the 3rd story with that, and then there's a cute little Hallmarky Christmas one, romance, and then, of course, my romance daughter becomes a nun, so my latest book that's just out is called Nuns with Guns. Another one that God just drops the title, I'm going, "Oh, that sounds interesting, let's see about that."
Yeah. That sounds like fun. I, am always looking for new fiction authors, so
Yeah.
I'm definitely gonna be reading
That one,
your
it's
fiction.
a comedy, it's just a whole comedy, and it actually the first chapter, when I told her that, do we have a few minutes or not?
Oh, yeah, yeah, we do.
Oh, okay. Alright. So, we went back to DC, and we're sitting at the table for dinner, and I drop that news, "Next book, Nuns with Guns," and she goes, "Mom, you can't do that." And I go, "Oh, yeah, I can." Then she turns to the gal next to her and says, "Okay, tell her what happened." So, they're in DC and super hot summer, and they're take the band to, like, a rescue mission to drop off some stuff. So, they're sitting most of them are back in the van because 'cause they're waiting for the driver to get back in, and they've got the side door open, and it's just super hot. So, there are people watching, homeless people going by, and one of these guys walks by with bunny slippers.
Mm.
And so they go, "Oh, that's interesting." Next thing you know, he's looking over his shoulder and he sees a cop. There's a cop following him. And so a few steps, looking over his shoulder, going up. Then he runs up a few cars ahead and ducks between the two, runs back to their driver's seat, gets into the car, the van, followed by the cop, trying to steal their van. And the cop was wrestling. I couldn't make this up. Is wrestling the keys from him. Finally says, "Everybody out, just let him go." So he takes off in the van. And then one of the sisters says, "Man, I left the cell phone in the van." And she says, a cell phone's a pretty big deal because there's like 30 of them and like 3 cell phones. So you lose a cell phone, you're it's the not a good thing. So she calls the cell phone and somebody answers and she says, "So are you driving a gray van?" And he goes, "No, but somebody from a gray van tossed this out the window, so I picked it up." He says, "A year ago, I would have sold this for drugs. 6 months ago, I'd have just sold it for money, but I'm feeling pretty nice. I'll bring it back to you."
Wow.
So he brings it back, and it, turns out that these slippers ends up catching the van and lands on its side and flat tires and all that stuff. But they do end up getting a new van. Some of the parishioners got together and bought him a new van. But so anyway, then I had to have this backstory. Who's Bunny Slippers and what's the story here? So
Right, right.
I got a bunch of ex-cons who are living in the house behind the convent, and
Okay.
then there's an attached basement where they find a dead body, so I have to figure out what's with the dead body,
Wow.
and then the ex-cons are connected to another gang, and there's a heist, and and then there's a bunch of Brother Ben is taking on a bunch of Ukrainian kids to keep them safe from the war, so they get involved in there, and there's a kidnapping, and a
This sounds like fun. I cannot wait to read this.
it's super fun. It's super fun. But, the thing that's interesting is, when I've written the romances, like, I don't want them to be preachy. I hate preachy books.
Yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah.
don't have a chapter in there where somebody's gonna give them the whole salvation, whatever. You just wanna
Yeah.
have real people, right? With real
Yeah,
things.
real people, real life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
with the writing from a nun perspective and stuff, it's so easy because even if you weren't saved, you would just expect a nun to say certain things,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
About God.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so in some sense, it was easier to do that kind of, I'm just gonna say there's some redemption at the ends.
Yeah. I'm considering doing some fiction writing, so
Yeah,
you have to
yeah,
be my mentor in that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right, Jan. So what would you like the audience to know? So if you don't mind sharing that and about your work, your books, your podcast, and then if you could close us in prayer, I would appreciate that.
Sure. The biggest thing is just keep trusting God. Whether you
Mhm.
see He's working, you don't see, that song Waymaker, even in the background, He's working, you don't see it. He's working on
Mhm.
His own time and in His own way. And you just gotta trust Him, whether you see it or not. Just give it some time, and maybe it's a lot of time, whatever, but God's good, and He
Yeah.
loves you, and He knows what you're going through, and just know that He's there for you.
Yeah.
And my website is jan-johnson.com. My
Mhm.
podcast is just talking about Jesus, and I just interview all kinds of people that just with their faith stories and sometimes topics and whatever. I'm also on Substack, so I can give you the links for those as well. And I'll put
Yeah.
yeah, you can find my books on my website as well. They're on Amazon too, but they're
Yeah.
both.
Yeah. And I'll make sure to put your website, your Substack, everything in the show notes so that any listeners who want to connect with you can do so easily.
And also, if somebody's interested in the Bible study, I would be willing to sit in on some Zooms with your groups too to, get you started on it and see how that is.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks so much
Friends,
for this opportunity too, Brenda. I appreciate.
yeah, no, I'm so glad you said yes. I've enjoyed getting to know you over the last few months, so this has been fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Lord, we come to you in thanksgiving and joyful being able to be in your presence. Lord, talking about you, there isn't anything better than talking about you and just seeing your perspective and finding out what great things that you've done, the stones that you've set up for each of us. The hard places, Lord, we thank you for the hard places because in the hard places we find you. And we thank you that you do have a plan for our lives. and that we do fit into it. Just guide us and help us to see along the way. Give us little God winks along the
Mm.
along the to remind us that you're there, and forgive us if we are not looking to you for our answers. We just praise you and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jan. If this episode resonated with you, there are two things I'd like you to consider. Number one, rate and review the show. This will help other listeners find the show and get the same inspiration and encouragement you got from it. And number two, I would love for you to share this episode with someone you love and someone you think could benefit from hearing this particular episode. Also, if you would like to connect with me outside of this podcast, you can find everything related to me on my website, brendasavanhu.com. There you can find my social media links if you'd like to follow. You can find a link to sign up for an email so that you can get weekly encouragement to your inbox. And you can find information about my book and coaching sessions. So friends, thank you again so much for listening to this episode, and thank you for considering sharing it with your friends. See you next time.